Sinon logs in as Solace, the sun goddess, and reunites with Asuna and Kirito, who remains in a catatonic state but appears to sense her friendship. Asuna requests that Sinon, who can fly, pursue Vecta while she prepares a counterattack against the remaining American players. Lifa also travels to the Underworld as Terraria, the earth goddess, and encounters Lil Pillin, the orc chieftain, who is shocked to be regarded as human for the first time. She allows him to take her to the Dark Lord Vecta as a prisoner, but they're confronted by the Dark Mage leader, Dil. She tries to consume Lifa's energy through the most obvious and convenient means, tentacles. But Lil Pillin overcomes Code 871 and comes to Lifa's rescue. Once free, Lifa severs the mage's arms, which has a significant impact on her overall health. Meanwhile, Bercouli Synthesis 1 rides on Dragonback in pursuit of Vecta and uses his sword's ability to ground Vecta's dragon. Despite his efforts, Bercouli is overwhelmed by Vecta's god mode and decides to fight to his death for Alice's sake. The Emperor leeches Bercouli's blade's incarnate abilities and clouds his consciousness, forcing him to lose focus on reality before severing his left arm. At the ruins, the remaining American players launch an attack on Asuna and her team, and Visago returns to the game in a new avatar, stalking Asuna from afar. Suddenly, Klein appears in the sky as a bright light in his ALO avatar, promptly followed by Agil, Liz, Silica, and hundreds of other players from ALO. They team up to launch a counterattack. At first, the group is overwhelmed, but with the reinforcements, they are able to gain the upper hand. Meanwhile, Higa, Wrath's tech genius, notices activity spikes in Kirito's Fluctlight as a result of his interactions with Asuna and Sinon. To restore Kirito's self-image, Higa devises a plan to use the Fluctlights of his friends. In order to execute the plan, they need to gain access to the main control room, which is currently occupied by the mercenaries. Higa decides to use a robot as a decoy, and through the ducts, gain access to a panel. Initially, he plans to go alone, but a maintenance worker, kind of a random NPC, volunteers to help. Despite being heavily injured, Bercouli attempts to use his time-splitting sword to slice Vecta in the past. However, Vecta catches him off guard. Just when it seems like it's Fluctlights out for Bercouli, his ever-loyal, if somewhat disobedient dragon appears and distracts Vecta, giving Bercouli enough time to strike the afterimage of Vecta in the past. The effects of the attack travel back to the future, extinguishing Vecta's Fluctlight capacitor. Bercouli succumbs to his wounds and dies as Alice wakes up, gutted upon seeing her dead uncle. Before his Force Ghost disappears, he asks Venatio to take care of their unborn child. With Vecta dead, Miller asks Critter to convert a character from his personal account so that he can return to the Underworld and continue with his plans. Sinon discovers Alice mourning Bercouli's death. Her instinct is to go back and join the fight, but Sinon encourages her to keep moving towards the world's end altar. Alice is unsettled by Sinon's explanation that people from the real world can essentially come back in another body since they don't really die here. Elsewhere, Sheta and Iskan fight the enemy forces, and the cold psycho realizes she's been looking for the one person she doesn't want to slash. And it just so happens that person is a barely clothed kid who solves everything with his fist. Asuna and her companions are shocked to see Visago leading a massive army of Korean and Chinese players while watching over the battlefield with his Po character. Meanwhile, Miller wakes up and logs back into the game using his Subtleizer character, coming face to face with a horrified Sinon. Back in the real world, Higa is about to hack into the main control room to restore Kirito's Fluctlight, when the random maintenance worker NPC guy that volunteered to help pulls a gun on him. In the Underworld, Subtleizer overpowers Sinon with some crazy magic or something, but she is saved by the electrode that saved Kirito, which is a manifestation of pure friendship, unhindered by rules or logic. The ALO players try to convince the Red Knights that they were deceived, but Visago intervenes and rallies them once again with a paper-thin argument. Sheta and Iskan, along with the surviving pugilists, aren't looking too hot, but Lifa and Lil Pillin arrive with the orc forces, of course, just in time to save their skins. Back in the real world, NPC maintenance guy reveals himself as the traitor working with the Americans, admitting that he was also involved in the administrator's sabotage of the Alicization project. He wants Kirito to die in revenge for her death, and yammers on that he used to work with Sugo in his illegal experiments. Kikuoka and Rinku uncover the betrayal and realize that he's the one who inserted Code 871 into the Underworld. Asuna and the others surrender to protect the residents of the Underworld, and Vasago confirms he really is Po. He confesses that he was the one who tipped off the assault team about Laughing Coffin's hideout in SAO, resulting in Asuna, Kirito, and the other frontline players becoming murderers. He then demands that Kirito be brought before him, and finally says it's showtime after decades of foreshadowing and buildup. In the midst of the chaos, Yui observes the SAO server rebooting unexpectedly. As Po is about to kill the catatonic Kirito, Eiji and Yuna arrive to aid him. Eiji challenges Po to avenge his friends from SAO, but he is ultimately defeated and Yuna takes him away. Po recalls his deep-seated resentment towards Japanese people, which stems from his father's abandonment and his mother, who was his father's mistress. His father only came to see him years later to ask him to donate a kidney to save his legitimate son's life, which prompted Po to steal nerve gear and log into SAO to kill Japanese players. Two of the red players recognize Po as a member of Laughing Coffin and try to persuade the others not to follow him, but their attempts are futile. Po uses his bizarre mind control power to make them start fighting each other. Elsewhere, Lifa's super account possesses unlimited regeneration, which enables her to keep fighting despite taking tons of damage and experiencing excruciating pain. She continues to fend off a swarm of red players until she's exhausted. She pulls through and makes her way to the World's End altar with the orc forces. Meanwhile, Sinon somehow has Hecate, but her leg gets blown off by Subtilizer and she falls to the ground. Her imagination is able to make her rifle act like the super account's bow and shoot an annihilation ray. It's a hit, and Subtilizer runs away like a back at the ocean turtle. Evil Trader Maintenance Guy's bullet merely grazes Higa. Another Wrath employee checks on him and throws something down the shaft, causing the gunman to lose his footing and plummet to the ground below. With the help of Asuna, Sinon, and Lifa, Higa tries to restore Kirito's Fluctlight, channeling their fremeries. Kirito awakens into what appears to be a dream. Vasago threatens to keep killing residents of the Underworld until Kirito awakens. Asuna hears words of encouragement from Yuki, gets up, and suddenly sprouts angel wings because, yeah. She then tosses him around like a rag doll. However, Vasago's weapon siphons the spatial energy around him to heal himself and take control of the red players, ordering them to attack. Asuna reaches out to Kirito, who's replaying his guilt-ridden memories, losing his friends all over again, watching himself become a murderer. Breaking down, he starts trying to rip out his own heart. Asuna, Sinon, and Lifa's Fluctlights aren't enough to snap him out of it. That is, until a fragment of Yu-Gi-Oh's own Fluctlight appears. Kirito, eyes wet with tears, asks his permission, if he's allowed to move on, to come back. His friends clasp his hand, creating a blinding light of friendship that restores his ego, self-image, Fluctlight thing, whatever. Kirito awakens in the Underworld. The smell of roses fills the battlefield, and the lone black swordsman utters, "Enhance armament." Vasago and the red players are stopped dead in their tracks by Yu-Gi-Oh's blue rose sword. Kirito and Vasago square up and start going at it, locking blades. It seems like Kirito is at a disadvantage, refusing to let go of the broken blue blade. Suddenly, Yu-Gi-Oh's Force Ghost appears. He uses Release Recollection to force the Red Knights to log out. Vasago attempts to use the spatial energy left behind, but Yuki's Force Ghost explains that because the now logged out players don't want that to happen, it won't. Then, Kirito's old apprentice mentions that his sword was made out of a Gigaseeder, which apparently lets it absorb spatial energy. And it also does a thing, and bam, the blue rose sword is back. The two clash blades, but now Kirito is so full of friendship, it's impossible to beat him. He destroys Vasago's blade and blasts a hole straight through his torso. Vasago, laughing, says he'll just log back in. Kirito tells him that the only way he'll be logging out is at the hands of a lumberjack and releases the memory of his Gigaseater blade, turning him into a tree. Meanwhile, Critter gets ready to remove the Underworld's limiters, so time will no longer be synced with the real world. Higa establishes a connection with Kirito's mind over an open channel, and Kikuoka warns him that if he doesn't escape with Asuna through the World's End altar, they'll be trapped there for 200 years. Alice arrives at the altar and sends her dragons away, but the dragons, equally as loyal as Bercouli's, confront Miller, who's still logged in and right on their tail. They don't really stand a chance, but before he can finish them off, Kirito and Asuna arrive on the scene. Asuna creates a staircase to the console and takes Alice to safety, while Kirito stays behind to face Miller. Kirito struggles against Miller's elite hacks. Somehow, he's become the most powerful entity in the Underworld. Having completely mastered magic, a maniacal Miller rips Kirito's legs off, while the two zip around with wings, because they can fly now. Suddenly, Miller transforms into a giant monster thing, while Kirito debates whether he actually wants to stay in the Underworld for selfish reasons. But his memory of Yu-Gi-Oh! Disagrees. He's not selfish. The bad guy is, obviously. Releasing the power of both blades traps whatever Miller has become, turning the sky dark as night. All across the Underworld, Kirito's friends give him their thoughts and prayers, which grants him unfathomable power. He goes in to finish Miller off, but he is broken free. The two battle, and Kirito gets his arm cut off. Yu-Gi-Oh! Appears again, taking up his falling sword, and together, he and Kirito defeat Evil Incarnate. The server reaches maximum acceleration and forces everyone to log out. Kirito flies to the floating pastoral platform to make sure Asuna and Alice made it out in time. And it hits him. He'll be stuck there for the next 200 years, and he breaks down. Only to hear Asuna's voice. She had stayed behind. Rinko retrieves Alice's light cube, relieved to find that Alice's memories are intact, and thanks Kirito for protecting them. Asuna tells Rinko that she will stay behind in the Underworld with Kirito as the system enters maximum acceleration. She promises to take care of him and keep him safe until he wakes up. Meanwhile, Miller returns to the real world, only to discover his own dead body. Alicia appears, his first victim, and tells him they get to spend eternity together as the floor turns liquid with hands reaching up to drag him below. Critter walks in to find Miller's corpse. He turns and sees Vasago's as well. Freaked out, he doesn't dwell on the logic or feasibility of the situation. He and the remaining mercenaries decide to dip. But before leaving, they rig the ocean turtle's main engine with explosives to destroy the facility and cover their tracks. However, Akihiko Kayaba, the creator of the original Sword Art Online, is somehow still around and able to control one of the installation's robots. He decides to disarm the bomb to save everyone, which is a first for Kayaba. On his initial attempt, the robot breaks down, but the mere mention of Kirito's ability to do the impossible gives Robot Kayaba a second wind, and he successfully disarms the bomb. Kirito and Asuna leave the World's End altar. All they have to do is live like 3 lifetimes before getting booted, which shouldn't have too much of an effect on them. Rinko holds a press conference to introduce Alice, now autonomous, with her Fluctlight implanted into an android. Alice puts a few reporters in their place, with some intro to philosophy rebuttals to all their ethical concerns, concerning life, the universe, and everything. Higa continues to watch over Kirito and Asuna, along with Kikuoka, who was officially declared dead as part of the cover-up for the incident. Alice notices that Kirito is waking up and unceremoniously checks out of the interview, leaving everyone hanging. Once Kirito comes to, he tells Alice that her sister is basically cryogenically frozen in the central cathedral, waiting for her. He then asks Higa to erase all of his and Asuna's memories of the past 200 years they spent together, ruling over the underworld as king and queen. While recuperating at the hospital, Kirito and Asuna are visited by Kikuoka, who tells them that he has a plan, or at least a hope, to prevent the government from seizing the underworld and its residents. Elsewhere, Higa talks to a copy of Kirito that he made before the memory deletion. Digital Kirito asks for his help in contacting Kaiba to look for a way to maintain the underworld in case the government interferes. At home, Kirito mourns Yu-Gi-Oh's death. Sugu comes into his room and asks him to tell her his story. Kirito receives a call from Rinko. She tells him that Alice has made a break for it and is now MIA. He then receives a package and finds that Alice shipped herself to his house, inconspicuously using a box labeled Wrath. She loses it on Kirito for staying behind in the underworld. To help her adjust better, he shows her the family dojo, and they spar, only to break the training swords because of their immense power. At dinner, his family celebrates his release from the hospital while expressing concern about everything that happened and what it means for his real future in the world, with physical people. That night, Alice receives a cryptic email. She shows it to Kirito, and they figure out that it might connect to the underworld. Along with Asuna, they head over to what's left of Wrath to test their theory of entering the underworld via the IP address from the secret coded message. They log in and find themselves in outer space with a view of a planet that is probably the underworld. 2 spaceships suddenly appear and seem to be piloted by Ronie and Tisei's descendants, who are being chased by a giant space monster. Kirito steps in with Asuna and Alice to slay the interstellar behemoth with their swords, since they are gods now who can propel themselves through space wearing medieval armor. The Integrity pilots, named mostly due to lack of imagination, not tradition, immediately recognize them, and Yu-Gi-Oh's Force Ghost, who's thrown into the mix. They obviously know them through some form of genetic memory. Teary-eyed, they're beside themselves at seeing the legendary heroes of the underworld as they fly back home. Thank you for sticking until the end. Subscribe for more videos like this.